This is the Parallax Podcast, and my name is Tom Amarque. In this new format, a kind of trialogue where I myself function as a kind of moderator, I invited two deep thinkers to talk about the recent events happening in the United States, that is, the protests, Black Lives Matter, and much more. I can welcome Thaddeus Russell, historian, philosopher, book author, and founder of the online academy Renegade University, as well as philosopher and popstar, author of numerous books, Alexander Bard from Sweden. Please check out their respective websites and books. They're all amazing. I'm very happy that they both agreed to do this, and I hope that this episode will serve as the first in a series of trialogues to come. So, enjoy this episode and take good care. Here we go. Thad, Alexander, thank you for coming to this podcast. I really was looking forward to that.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Thad, my question is a perfect starting off point. What is going on in America, and in a kind of way, what is wrong with the so-called left in this particular time?
Why do you ask? Nothing much is going on. We're just sort of going about our daily business, having picnics and, hanging out with our families. What do you ask, Tom?
Yeah, no, it looks exactly like this, yes.
Everything's normal in America, and that's why people want to flock to our nation, because it's such a peaceful, calm, orderly place. What's the question?
Right.
So we are living... America has a history of hysterias. I haven't compared it to other countries' histories on this, but, we began in a sense with the Salem witch trials. I don't know if you know about that, but, very famous, very early American hysteria. And we've had a series of hysterias over the centuries. I'd say they've accelerated and gotten greater in the 20th century. So we had the Red Scare. We had a couple of Red Scares, fears of communists, which were not totally groundless, but they were, obviously greatly exaggerated. We've had many, many scares involving sex. We're very hysterical about sex. We had the white slavery panic in the early 20th century, in which many Americans actually believed that white women were being snatched off the streets by Chinese men and drugged and sold into sex slave rings. We had the marijuana panic of the 1930s and 1940s, reefer madness, otherwise known as. Then we had, various drug panics in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, all of which resulted in gigantic, horrific crimes that have put 2.3 million people in prison and resulted in the deaths of lots of people on the streets as well over the last 40 or 50 years. I think... that the last 5 to 6 years has been perhaps the most hysterical era, at least in a modern American history. It's hard to know. I'm a historian, but, I wasn't obviously on the ground in Salem, then, and I wasn't on the ground during the other panics, so I couldn't really feel it, right? I only know it as a scholar, but I feel this. And I know that in my lifetime, I've never felt such a wave of panic, multiple waves of panic. So we had 5-6 years ago, we had, and all, by the way, everything stupid and bad that comes out of America comes from universities and colleges. Okay. Almost all of it. So, So all this stuff emanates from colleges and universities, everything you've been seeing in the last 5 to 6 years. So we had in 2011, 12, and 13, we had the sex assault panic on college campuses, right? Where it was claimed that 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 or maybe 1 in 5 women were raped in colleges, which would make it the most violent for women place on earth. When in fact colleges, of course, in the United States are the safest physical spaces for any human being ever devised. And millions and millions of very wealthy, very powerful families continued to send their young daughters to colleges without any problem. So clearly there was a problem there. But we had nonetheless, and I was right in the middle of this, I was in colleges where this hysteria was just out of control. We had people marching around the campuses demanding that people be expelled and fired for all sorts of stuff that wasn't rape. We had lots of people talking about, well, I said I wasn't interested in having sex tonight, but my boyfriend said yes, and I did, and went along with it, and that immediately gets conflated with rape. 2 people being intoxicated was rape. a woman not feeling really cool about having sex, but doing it anyway and not saying no, right? You know, right?
Mm.
But the point was, it wasn't so much that it was 19 and 20-year-old girls talking about sexuality when they're brand new to sex. I understand that, right? I completely understand that. I'm not angry at any of the young women who were involved in this. I'm furious at the faculty and the media who stoked it and got a lot of people believing that these colleges on these leafy campuses were rape factories.
Right.
When in fact they were dominated by, where the majority of students were women, 60% in many cases, right? Huge portions of the faculty were not just women, but ultra feminist women. The administrations were 100% liberal feminist people, you know. So that was one hysteria that a lot of people believed. And then the second, following right on that, sort of in 2016, 2017, was the race hysteria on college campuses, which was even more hysterical, which was, and this was virtually every college campus in the country. And so we're talking hundreds and hundreds of college campuses, mostly the elite college campuses, which I think is very important here. Where you had, you know, thousands, it looked like thousands.
Thad, you know where I went to college when I went to college in America?
Where?
Oberlin.
Oh my God. You went to the craziest of them all.
Oh yeah. I went there in 1978, 79, and you had to be a bisexual and a Maoist to join.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I officially became a bisexual and a Maoist. You know,
Yeah,
I was my introduction to sex work. That was Oberlin. That's like the worst of them all, right?
I went to Antioch, which is also in Ohio, which was even more radical. So I was a socialist, but a heterosexual. So I was the conservative on campus. I'm not kidding.
It is funny, but sick. Yeah.
I'm not kidding about that. I was considered to be like a conservative on campus because even though I was a revolutionary socialist, Marxist, I shaved.
Mm.
Right. And I groomed and I dressed normal. I mean, really. So yeah, Oberlin, Alexander, I don't know if you know this, the Ku Klux Klan was extremely active in Oberlin about 3 years ago. There was a sighting of a white sheet on campus and the whole campus shut down. The administration offered an apology. Classes were canceled. There were days of taking account of the white supremacy among the faculty and students at Oberlin College, that we lived in on a white supremacist campus. Turned out it was a freshman girl who had sex with some boy and was afraid of being found out. And so she put the next morning a white sheet over her head as she walked out of his dorm room so she wouldn't be seen.
Wow.
God.
This was national news.
And America invented the term wisdom of crowds.
Right.
It's like the madness of crowds. It's like everywhere, right?
And this was all these things were national news. These were reported in national news outlets as if they were fact. So I had a colleague, this is when the Oberlin thing happened, I had a colleague in Los Angeles where I was teaching then at Occidental College, who's a professor. She's a professor of social science, okay? And she had a daughter or a son, I think, at Oberlin at the time. And we had lunch, and she said, "Have you heard what's going on at Oberlin?" I said, "No, what?" She said, "The Ku Klux Klan is active there." And I just... The Ku Klux Klan is active nowhere. And if it's going to be active anywhere, Oberlin College in Ohio is the last place it will be active. So these were all hysterias. It was very scary and difficult. Buildings were surrounded. People were harassed. People lost their jobs. People lost. Boys were expelled from colleges. All sorts of stuff happened. I mean, real material damage to people's lives. Then we have the election of Trump. Just a tiny bit of hysteria around that one. Mm-hmm. So for the first few months, it was that we just elected a Nazi KKK leader to president. And that's, as you recall, that's what most liberals believed, that he wasn't like just right wing. He wasn't even maybe just racist. He was an actual Nazi, right? That's what, and this was believed by establishment, educated, highly intelligent people. Let's never forget that. We need to catalog that because they're conveniently letting us forget that. The claims made about Trump, they were saying he was a Nazi. Okay, this was in the New York Times. This was like high level intellectuals.
And to the rest of the world, America just elected Cartman from South Park for president, which makes sense to the rest of the world. Yeah, it's just Cartman, right?
We elected a TV show star clown.
Yeah,
like that's all it was. Right?
I predicted that in the book 16 years before. The book, The NEtOCRATS, the year 2000, chapter 6, at the death of politics, and politics can no longer make anything constructive, can only be destructive at worst, means America, when politics goes ironic, the time when politics become ironic, so people know it's just a theater, it's just a game, will be when America picks the most celebrated person for president, meaning they will pick a reality TV show star.
You nailed
6 years later, they did. Yeah, I did that 60. Well, we do nail quite a few things. It's comfortable sitting in Scandinavia, which, by the way, is completely Americanized and merely mimics what they see in America without understanding what's going on. You have no idea how weird Black Lives Matter is in Sweden at the moment with no blacks around. It's just the weirdest thing ever. So, but it's fascinating to sit here because I'm like a retracted monk sitting in a monastery at the end of the world with my little team here, and we just go around the world and we watch these weird places, including America. That's why, to me, it was Cartman from South Park, and I am shocked to say that people who had an official academic education in America thought they elected a Nazi for president, but they did. I admit it, and you're right.
The most educated people. Yeah. Ordinary Americans did not think that Trump was a Nazi. It was the most educated political scientists and historians and philosophers who believed that Trump was a Nazi. I mean, there were videos made by Yale professors. I remember one in particular, Timothy Snyder's a very, very prominent historian of World War II. He gave a series of videos about how Trump was ushering in fascism to the United States. It was just like astonishingly stupid. And he was a historian of fascism. This is a historian of fascism.
Yeah. And I got bad news for you, Thad, because we're going to get more of this and worse.
I guess.
Because I predicted 8 years ago, wrote a paper called The Golden Age of Sects and Cults. And that was kind of nice because a phenomenon called the internet came along. And since the internet is a flat structure with 8 billion people screaming at the top of their lungs and nobody's listening to anybody, and then we tried to get an algorithm to figure out what's going on, it's going to take decades before that algorithm works okay, so we can finally get some kind of order to the chaos. So America... the two places that the world is going to copy and be similar to are America and India. And at least in India, the hysteria has been going on for 5,000 years. You cannot connect India to the world's hysteria any longer because it's just like, it's just life, right? But in America, they still take themselves seriously while actually behaving in this sort of imperial manner like the Indians do. And these, of course, are the two cultural superpowers of the next 100 years. We're not going to watch Chinese movies, especially not when a dictator dictates the script, right? So we're gonna have Indian and American culture for a long time to come. That's where the Netflix series is gonna come from. But the storytelling will be different. It says that America still takes itself incredibly seriously without a history, whereas India has a long history and doesn't take itself seriously. So I'm kind of more of a fan with India, but I expect them both to produce sects and cults. And as I always say, astrology for women is conspiracy theories for men, and the only difference is hormonal.
Whoa.
Yeah, expect more of those things, right? More and more conspiracies, more and more astrology, because in chaos, when the complexity is increasing and there's no order to that complexity, meaning that the coronavirus is not even one of the bad ones. It's not even one of the bad pandemics. Usually you get 7 or 8 ones of these every century. This wasn't even a bad one. It's only old people and fat people died. And a lot of fat black people in Detroit, so they died a lot. But, at the end of the day, the youth didn't die, kids didn't die, mothers survived this, right? So, but still, it was the first pandemic in the internet age, right? So the world being Americanized, because all the hierarchy of information is that's exactly why I left America when I was 20, because, and I admire you for staying there, being the Alexander Bard of America. So we have one of me there, that's you. But I left because I felt that in America, it was impossible, at least in the early 1980s, it was impossible to get a worldview because America was obsessed with America. And there was no way the rest of us could avoid it. So you could go anywhere in the world. You'd make sure you knew everything about America. The first time you travel through America as non-American, you're terribly disappointed because everything is exactly like it was in the movies. and as boring as in the movies, because it's all the same. Nature is stunning, but the food.
Alexander, if I may interrupt you, I would like to steer the topic more into the direction of the left and Black Lives Matter.
Oh, okay,
what's currently going on.
So, sorry about that.
So because
I'll finish it. Yeah, I'll finish it off just to say that the pandemic and what's happening now is going to have more of this madness. That's all I wanted to say. Please go back to that. Yes, please.
Right.
Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. So I was just finishing up my history of hysterias in this country. So we also had, child sex panics in the 90s that put a lot of people in prison. Right. What was it called? The ritual abuse scandal. The McMartin preschool. I don't know if you guys know about this, but like, hundreds and hundreds of people across the country were accused and convicted of molesting and assaulting children in preschools, all of which turned out to be a hoax. So anyway, then we have Trump. He's a Nazi. That's the hysteria at first for several months. And then that was replaced by another hysteria that we are run by Vladimir Putin. And that lasted for 3+ years. It's still lingering, but it didn't really end until the Mueller report just flat out said it didn't happen. But that took, it was several years of, wow. That was the hardest for me to take, because it was, again, the most educated people. It was a lot of people who I formerly respected. I disagreed with them maybe, but they seemed like, highly intelligent, serious people. And I looked at them like they had been, like they were zombies. I couldn't understand the way they were thinking. I just would stare at the TV screen, and in disbelief, I would watch people watching these reports from Rachel Maddow and other liberal people in this country about how Russia was running things. And it didn't comport with any single thing I saw. So that was a hysteria. That, of course, infected only the liberal political class, but that's a lot of people in this country, and they run all of our institutions. So the liberal political class in this country runs all of academia. It runs most of media, basically outside of Rupert Murdoch. It runs everything outside of Rupert Murdoch's kingdom, which is a ton. And here's the most important thing, and this is something probably Alexander gets right away, is that, and someone needs to write a history of this, basically, they control the moral high ground. So after World War II, kind of the moral center of the country shifted, right? So in a lot of good ways. Like before then, racism, like old-fashioned racism, was totally fine, totally common, totally accepted, respectable, taught in the schools even. Anti-Semitism was absolutely fine and normal and respectable. So that all shifted, right? And so it was totally, you were a good, moral, upstanding person in America if you were a flat-out scientific racist. Now, not a Klansman who went around burning shit, but if you believed that black people were biologically inferior, that's what Harvard professors believed. So there was nothing wrong with that. The belief in capitalism as a good system, that was the center. That was the moral center. It was unquestioned, right? And if you did question it, you were marginalized, and then by the 1950s, you were actually expelled from polite society and institutions and jobs and all the rest of it. But so there was a whole shift, like in the 50s and 60s, where the bad guys became. Shelby Steele, the great black intellectual, has made this argument. I think it's totally brilliant, where the old America of racism and sexism and, big robber baron capitalists and, the old America of our imagination, some of it's real and some of it's our imagination, became shameful. Right. And then the new America of, anti-racism and Martin Luther King and no sexism and Roe v. Wade and capitalism is at best to be watched closely. It's all that now is the moral center, right? So conservatives, libertarians, the Republican Party, like they have to always fight to be considered to be the morally good ones. It is assumed, and I'm none of those things, by the way, right? I am none of them, but it is assumed that they are bad people.
But this was, of course, because Adolf Hitler basically mimicked the British and French conquest of North America. That's at least what Hitler thought. And he just wanted to conquer the East and then, make the Russians and the Ukrainians into what native Indians had become in North America. And he built concentration camps and just to kill the locals, to then move German peasants into it everywhere. And of course, we turned Hitler into ultimate evil in 1945, without looking into the details. And of course, then after 1945, it's impossible anywhere to my argument is that phallus died after 1945 because of Hitler, Stalin, and the atomic bomb. And then later we included colonialism and the exploitation of the planet, and finally arrive at Greta Thunberg. So it's like this whole movement after 1945 has been anti-phallic, which is understandable if you consider that phallus had failed, or at least had succeeded in a very bloody and merciless way and exploited the planet in the process. So the opposition against that, because looking from here, from Europe, what America then did in the 1950s and the 60s to us was that it completely took over the whole fantasy, the whole media landscape. Everything was American, right? So we imported something very interesting in the 1950s that I call the American teenager as an ideal. And this is like a polytheistic ideal, like a God you can actually relate to, a lesser God, so you can actually pray to him. So it ties deeply physiobiologically to people's minds. And maybe when both James Dean and Marilyn Monroe went and killed themselves, we should have had a warning sign out that we shouldn't worship youth. We should actually worship wisdom, because all cultures previously in all of history have done that. And suddenly this youth worship, this worship of the sexualized female body and later the sexualized male body becomes the standard. And this is where your work and my work tie into each other, because your work on the renegades and my work on the shamanoid people is, to me, that's where that idea comes from. But then it became mass culture because a lack of phallic culture, a lack of father figures, if you so say, was filled in with shamanic or renegade ideas that suddenly they were no longer experimental to push society, but actually became the idea of the mainstream. And the conservative traditionalist reactions we see today are like, no, we don't want the hippies of the 1960s again. It's always back to that, because they see the experiments when renegadism became mass culture in the 1960s, to see that ultimately as a failure, which maybe it was because the wrong people started taking the drugs or whatever. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I don't know if this is veering too far from Tom's question, but so I think this might be a helpful distinction that I make, I don't know of anybody else who does, but for me, one split that I think is important in American culture is between pop culture, what I call, you may have heard me say this, formal culture, right? And that's just my term, So for me, formal American culture is the language, the discourse of government, of the big businesses, the military, the teachers, the schools. Kind of what is considered to be the proper discourse of a good American citizen. Okay, so that's formal discourse. Now that is alive and well. It is being taught as we speak around the country. It is what is still spoken, even occasionally by Trump. I'll get to Trump in a second, but certainly the political class this is how they speak. This is how they speak in the schools, right? And it is still just as puritanical, just as repressed, just as sterile as it pretty much has been, at least in the 20th century, since the 20th century. That it really hasn't changed, with one huge exception, which we'll get to in a second. Then there's popular culture, right? And that's kind of more what Alexander's talking about, like the takeover of popular culture by the renegades, by the really bad, by the drug takers, by the drinkers, by the dancers, by the fornicators, it's no longer Doris Day and Rock Hudson pretending to be romantic, when Rock Hudson actually had no interest in women at all. So it was all desexed. Pop culture in America and worldwide is as raunchy as it ever has been, right? So it is more hedonistic, I think, than ever before. I mean, you can click a button and watch anal sex on any, immediately, right? We all know that. But what's interesting is the puritanical formal culture remains basically unchanged, except until 2016. So when Trump, and this may be his enduring legacy, and I think it's a good one if it's true, he did not, somehow he missed class on all those days when it was taught to us that we're supposed to behave in particular ways, especially when we're political leaders. it's not even that he's rebelling against it. It's as if he's unaware that he's supposed to behave in a certain way, which is what's so funny about him. And then when he finds out that he's supposed to say this and not say that and look this way and act this way, he's sort of like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, so it's sort of like this naive character in a very good way, though, right? So, and he insults people the way that who insults people the way that Donald Trump, everybody. In their personal life, everybody does that. Everybody. He vocalizes what was not vocalized by political leaders before. I said just in a tweet the other day, he said something about like how great he was, one of his like self-aggrandizing tweets, like, oh, my poll ratings are up to whatever percent and look how great I am. And I tweeted, I said, look, the beautiful thing, I said, Trump thinks, you're an idiot if you don't think this. Trump thinks just like any other politician. Do you think other politicians don't care just as much about the poll numbers as he does? Of course they do. The difference is the beauty of Trump is that he turns the politician's mind inside out. So we see exactly all the inner workings. Like he's completely unedited. It's fantastic, right? He also turns inside out the workings of the state, right? Like when he was interviewed early on and said, we've killed a lot of people too. The CIA has done a lot of nasty stuff in its history, right? It's the way he talks about everything is the blunt language that we've always been missing about what the state actually is and does, right? He actually understands it, and he's not afraid of talking about it.
Right.
So
let me try to bring this together, because you were talking now about formal culture and popular culture. Isn't the hysteria you were starting with, isn't that part of both systems in a way? And when they kind of converge, I mean, it's like to talk about high educated people who are like pushing certain agendas, these are my words, pushing certain agendas and creating some form of hysteria, and popular culture is zoning into this. You see this in the celebrity videos in regard of, George Floyd and whatever, and Me Too, and it's like a weird feedback loop between those two systems, and the weird. I don't know if this is a fitting description, but for me it's a weird phenomenon, because systems or movements like Black Lives Matter are the only ones who can actually address structural racism and all those things, but seem not really good equipped to do that in a structural and functional manner. What do you say to this?
Yeah. So first of all, you see elements of what I've been calling formal, puritanical, hysterical, I suppose, culture in pop culture. Always has been, right? There's always been. Well, there was, I said, Rock Hudson and Doris Day in the 1950s, who had this sort of like platonic relationship thing going on. Sure, you see these idiotic Hollywood celebrities saying stupid stuff about George Floyd and racism and white supremacy and blah, 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 blah. And there's plenty of TV shows and movies that celebrate family, the military, citizenship, patriotism, sexlessness, right? But it's always, so far at least, thank God, those have been minorities, right? Within pop culture, look, in America is still basically about fucking, fighting, drinking, doing drugs, having fun, right? I mean, it's basically most of what it is, right? I mean, if you go look at the top 20 songs right now on Spotify in this country, I don't know what they are, but I guarantee you almost all of them are about fucking. Right. So thank God. And by the way, credit to the rappers and the black people in this country who are not assimilated. It's the unassimilated black people, especially, who are unafraid completely of talking like renegades.
With tons of Swedish songwriters.
Yeah.
That's the irony. There you go.
Yeah. Right. That's right. Yeah. So, so there's that. So yeah, so I would caution you, when you see bonehead Hollywood celebrity videos, that is not how most American popular culture looks. You guys know that. I mean, you know what most look. The head of Pornhub on that great John Ronson podcast about Pornhub, and he said that I think it's 180 million views just from the United States every single day. So we know what's going on in the United States in terms of popular culture, right? And that's just porn. That's just porn. So that's that.
Okay, and how does it tie in with hysteria and Black Lives Matter and what you like?
Oh, Black Lives Matter. So,
because we were starting off with hysteria, and now you were mentioning that we're going into a phase of race hysteria. Did I get that correctly?
Yeah.
And so do you think Black Lives Matter as a functional movement to address real problems, or
well, so Black Lives Matter is not an organization, although there are organizations that use the name Black Lives Matter. There so far have been, as far as I know, 2 fairly thorough policy papers, basically, or sets of demands issued. One was by DeRay Mackison, called Project Zero, I want to say. And that was early on. That was several years ago. And that one, I agree with about 80 to 90% of it. It's actually pretty damn good. It's basically about just defanging the police. It's just about, demilitarizing the police, limiting their, what they can do, the conduct of police in various ways. Then there was another, and about a year later, I don't know, I want to say maybe 2018, there was another group that called itself Black Lives Matter, and I can't remember the name of it. They're terrifying Maoists, and their program was, it was some kind of blend of Maoism and Stalinism.
But this is the problem with all these hashtags. They naively talk about how flat they are, but to me, it's just Rousseauian romanticism. And the problem here, for example, in Scandinavia, where we mimic America a lot, is that Black Lives Matter came over here as a new trendy thing, and people started demonstrating and spread the coronavirus like mad, and it was completely hijacked by the Muslim Brotherhood, who are anti-Semitic and hate gay guys. It's just like, why? Because there are no Black Americans in Sweden. And I've been right in the maelstrom of it here in Sweden, obviously, because I pointed that out and just basically told the journalists, why don't you go out and find where Black Lives Matter Sweden comes from? Because you certainly didn't accept that the last time those guys did something. So maybe you should look it up. It's just like, why would you accept that a hashtag come from America automatically is what happens in America, when actually George Floyd getting killed in America is one incident, and you have about 15, 20 similar incidents in Scandinavia every week that you don't cover. So we have a problem, for example. I'll give you an example. If you're 19 years old in Sweden today, the majority of 19-year-olds think that Somali immigrants in Sweden have slave ancestors because they watch nothing but American hip-hop movies or videos all the time. So they think the Somali immigrants who look a bit like Black Americans must have the same heritage. And, the vast majority of 19-year-olds in Sweden think we have grand juries in our courtrooms. We do not have grand juries in our courtrooms. It's just they see so many American TV series and so many American YouTube shows or whatever. They believe that. Wow. They're so Americanized now because the internet is so driven from America, even more than television was, and they haven't found their own language, their own expression yet. The problem here is that something like Black Lives Matter is imported here, and then we've got havoc in the streets of, say, Paris and France and Stockholm, Sweden, when actually the people out there, it's no connection at all to the situation in America. That's the problem with these hashtags, and that's why they cause so much havoc.
Wow.
It looks so comfortable. It looks so wonderful. You can just create a hashtag, make no effort, start an organization, not organize anything, and it just explodes, and everybody jumps onto it, and you got the T-shirt, you got the Instagram picture, and then, 3 weeks later, the wrong guys, hijack the whole thing and turn it into violence in the streets.
I was pretty shocked by the size of the demonstrations across Europe for George Floyd.
Yeah.
Wow.
It wasn't for George Floyd. I can assure you that. It was just frustration coming out of COVID-19, and anything that popular media distributed that was an excuse to run out of the streets and cause havoc was picked up.
Probably a lot of it. Yeah.
So how is American this department? How much is genuine? How much is just mimicked from one part of America to the next?
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I didn't know it was that stark of a mimicry in Europe. That's too bad. So back to Black Lives Matter and who they are, right? So I was just talking on my podcast with Hotep Jesus this week about this, actually. he's kind of a, I don't know, you guys know about the Hoteps? They're like the black alt-right. They're very funny too. Anyway, so I was had him on the show, but we and he had noticed that Black Lives Matter was being run by women and gay guys, and like he didn't like it and he didn't understand why, and I explained. It's, again, what did I say 20 minutes ago? Everything emanates from the academic left, the college left, everything. Okay, so all of every single Black Lives Matter leader that I've become aware of comes from some elite university or college in the United States, like 100%. Black women in this country are the most educated in terms of holding a bachelor's degree social group of all. Black women hold more per capita bachelor's degrees than any other social group in the United States. Think about that. Okay. Now, the leadership of Black Lives Matter is overwhelmingly women with a handful of gay guys. And I knew where they came from as soon as they opened their mouths, because I've been in those campuses for 25 years, right? I know that way of thinking. You don't learn that shit from the streets of Compton. You don't learn that. You don't even learn that shit from the streets of Beverly Hills. You don't learn that shit anywhere but from a campus. It is not spoken by ordinary American, white or black. 90% of black and white people in this country have no idea what they're talking about half the time. What they do understand is that a white cop apparently killed a black guy, an unarmed black guy, for no good reason on this video. They know that. Americans are not deep thinkers, and especially about politics. Sometimes that's good. It's often very bad. In 2014, 2015, I was crying on a regular basis from the videos that were coming out. I was one of those people. I was like, kill the cops. There's a nationwide racist manhunt on for black men. Turns out, then I did about 2 or 3 years of research, and I started talking with friends, particularly my friend Camille Foster, who's very big on this, who's in the Fifth Column podcast. And my thinking on this radically changed because it became very clear. Many things became really clear. Every time a cop kills someone, look, hey, I'm an anti-statist. All right. So, it's just that the state kills people and things all day, every day around the world. Right. So just kind of pick your battles here. Now, so last year there were 41 people in the unarmed people in the United States who were killed by cops. So so first of all, that's terrible. Yes. But there's 350 million people in this country, number one. So it's a microscopic percentage. Number two, when you actually read, unfortunately, like the details of those 41 cases, black and white and Mexican, like I would say the majority, there's a good chance that those are actually good killings by the police, because the people were either running at them, threatening them with a gun, pretending to have a gun, doing something that was like not so good. Only 9 of those unarmed people were black, and 19 were white. Okay, then if you look at the 9 black cases, and Tucker Carlson actually did this, who knows? A lot of this is based on police reporting, and they often lie. So I'm not saying, this is definite. But first of all, it's only 9, right? You have a much better chance as a black man of drowning than of getting killed by a cop. And of those 9, it's almost definite that at least a majority were guys who were doing stuff that gets you killed.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now, does that mean I think that everything's great with policing and that black people should shut up and go home and just continue? No, fuck no. We have close to 1 million law enforcement officers in this country now. We are way over policed, and black neighborhoods are way, 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 way over policed. Why is that? Not because we're racist, but because black political leaders and religious leaders beginning in the 1960s and 70s, along with much of the Democratic Party and some of the Republican Party, called for a very strict, you could say apocalyptic, crackdown on drugs.
Yes, exactly.
And that was led, motherfuckers, by black people, black leaders, not the black ordinary people, but black. It
Like
came
in the
out of the
spirit
church.
of Martin Luther King, I presume.
Yes. And
So the tragedy we got today is that you say that black women are incredibly successful, especially Nigerian immigrant women, but black American women are incredibly successful at college.
Yes.
But they're not being met. If they want to marry a black guy, they're not being met because 30% of black guys at any given time are locked up in prison because of the war on drugs. I always emphasize this over here in Europe. I repeatedly say this. This is not about the symbolic at all. This is very, very real. And the real problem with America, ever since Prohibition, is always you go back to the war on drugs. And it's, I love South America, but everywhere you go from northern Mexico all the way down to Colombia, it's just torn apart by the war on drugs completely.
Yes.
And they still believe this myth that it's a war they still have to fight. Instead of just give it up. I said, this was ridiculous. It was ridiculous all along. For me, this is the war against the shamanic. Because obviously drug traditions exist in any civilized culture. The shamans take care of that. You go to see somebody, they will let you know whether you're ready or not for a certain experience, and it's integrated in your spiritual life. And of course, the problem with Christianity and eventually, especially with Protestantism and Prohibition, was that we should clean society, purify it, get the alcohol and drugs out of here. And this, because people love alcohol and drugs, this was, of course, a war that was doomed to fail. And it's really the Third World War, if we're honest about it. Look at the number of deaths it's caused, all that. And this is what I'm saying, where there's a problem with the black community in America. They are the ones that suffer the most from the war of drugs, especially on the masculine side. Yes.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that with on the show this week with Hotep Jesus. So here's the deal with black people in this country. Here's the quick history that explains this, right? So enslaved, okay, already you're told that you are not a part of this country. You're just here to work, obviously. So they had zero incentive to feel like Americans. God bless them, by the way. So they developed their own distinctive culture because they had no reason to shape their culture according to American standards because they were never going to get citizenship or anything else. So they were like, fuck it, we're going to do our own thing. And then after that, as you well know, right, there was a brief moment where they were given citizenship and then that was taken away. And then segregation, Jim Crow for about 100 years, 60, 70 years. And again, the message was, you are not Americans. And a lot of black people said, oh, okay, we're not Americans. So we're going to do our own thing. We're going to basically have our own nation here, right? And then by the 1960s, now drugs had already been made illegal, but the crackdown didn't start until 1965 with Lyndon B. Johnson, the great liberal president's crime law. Okay, so you have a whole class of people who have been enslaved and then segregated and then redlined, right, and impoverished basically by mostly state actions, but most importantly, culturally have always been told that you're not us. And then in response, most black people have said, as I said, okay, we're not you. Okay, so then you make this substance that is extremely popular, illegal, right? Illicit, illegal, terrible. It's the worst thing you can do is deal drugs. Worst thing you can do is be on drugs. Well, that goes over really well with good American citizens who listen to their leaders and listen to authority. Listen to and listen to the nightly news and actually think that they're telling the truth. Listen to the cops and think the cops are telling the truth. The politicians and think they're generally telling the truth. Black people, for a whole bunch of really good reasons, didn't. So, like the Italians in the 1920s and the Jews in the 1910s, who were not assimilated then and not Americans, who entered the black market, Prohibition, right, during Prohibition, black people entered this black market because they were like, fuck America. Like, we'll do our own thing. We don't abide by these norms, right? Now, that's not all black Americans. There was, as I said, there was a black middle class, there was a black clergy, there was a black political class, very, 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 very different attitudes about all these things. Overwhelmingly wanted to assimilate into American culture and become full citizens, right? And so they were the ones in the 1960s, and there's a whole book on this by Michael J. Von Fortner, who's a sociologist at City University of New York. They were the ones who led the call in the 1960s, beginning in Harlem, to crack down on all the drug pushers in their neighborhoods. And that was the origin of all these horrendous drug laws, these medieval fucking drug laws that put people in prison for decades for distribution, for possession, right? And then there's ancillary crimes, right? Crimes that are associated with drugs. And this is what people don't understand. So people say, in response to what I'm saying, oh, there's only 15% of prisoners are in there for drug offenses. That's true, but the FBI and others have done studies which show that crimes associated with drugs, like people who are hooked on cocaine but are poor and therefore have to rob somebody to get their fix, right? That accounts for roughly half of all prisoners. So we have 2.3 million incarcerated in this country. So roughly half, more than 1 million, I'm saying, and the FBI is saying, are in there because of the drug war in some way or another. And disproportionately, they're black because black people, again, don't abide by our rules. For good, God bless them. God fucking bless them. You know why? Because I love drugs. I love drugs, and if they weren't dealing them, I wouldn't have had access to drugs for all these years.
I totally endorse that.
Well, God bless the mafia in the 1920s for distributing alcohol when you couldn't get it from anywhere else. God bless the mafia for opening the first gay bars in the United States at that very same time, because they were like, we're fucking Sicilians. We don't give a shit about this country. Gays, whatever, we don't care. We don't like it, but it's like, we're not following. So they opened gay bars. All the gay bars in New York City were owned by the mafia. God bless them, right? God bless all the little Jewish petty criminals who founded the pornographic industry in the United States. There's a whole great book about that too. Porn was invented, developed, distributed by Jews, like kind of petty criminal type Jews, right? Because they were unassimilated and didn't follow the rules of the WASP dominant culture. So the war on drugs comes along. Who's going to get smashed hardest? The people who have entered that black market for good reasons. It's black people, not just black people, because we have 500,000 white people in prison right now too, who never get mentioned. And it fucking pisses me off. We have white people getting shot by the cops every single week. Never gets mentioned. It fucking pisses me off. In cases that are just as egregious as George Floyd. Just as egregious. I can give you example after example of like white teenagers backing their car out of a driveway and getting shot 8 times because the cops were there on a suicide call because they thought he was suicidal. Now explain to me why you have to shoot a kid you think is suicidal 8 times as he's backing out of his fucking suburban driveway in a minivan. 17 years old. He looks like my son. Never mentioned.
Why is that?
Happens all the fucking time. There's a video that'll turn all of your blood cold. You may have seen it, of a guy in his 20s in Arizona who was on his hands and knees in a motel room, and there was like a call that he had a gun. He didn't have a gun. He was clearly unarmed. He's in the hallway on the floor on his hands and knees, and this cop's got the rifle trained on him the whole time. And he's giving them all these directions that it's hard to understand, and the guy's freaked out and he's drunk and he like moves his hand the wrong way. Bam, 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 dead.
I think he wanted to adjust his trousers. Could that be?
Whatever. Yeah, but it was clearly a terrible, terrible shooting. He was white. No one gives a fuck. That should have been riots all over the country.
Right.
If he were black, think about the buildings that would have burned. If that guy were black in that video, think about the buildings that would have burned in this country.
This is all about narratives, right? So certain narratives stick, and in an internet-driven society where there's so much information all the time thrown out at you, we tend to stay with that, with the stock already. So one of these, say Rodney King happened, then George Floyd can happen. Without Rodney King, before George Floyd, like 2 decades before, you wouldn't have George Floyd on the massive scale you do today. Mm-hmm. So I think the problem is that this is all about narratives. To begin with, there's no grand narrative left. I always argue that the American dream is dead.
Yeah.
Nobody believes any longer. So you will forever see America divided between Fox and CNN from a European perspective, and they will never ever meet. They become more and more locked up in two ditches, and in between that, the only way actually to flow through that would be a radical movement against the war on drugs, possibly united with some kind of movement for a free and open algorithm. So say you would try to hit on Silicon Valley, like, no, don't manipulate and corrupt our algorithms. Don't put commercials into there, but don't also put political correctness into that. Get that out, keep the free and open algorithm. And that becomes sort of freedom movement. Because freedom in America today would be both directed towards the tech companies, so we can keep the internet free and open as much as possible and go to Gab if Twitter doesn't qualify any longer, whatever. And next to that would also be the actual war on drugs, which is another libertarian project. And I think that could unite eventual blacks and whites, etc., to see that that's where the real problem is. This is the systematic problem that can be dealt with. That with very little changes, you could actually radically transform a lot of America in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the war on drugs we have to eliminate. So it's the laws. This is what I've been like hammering. Oh, it's so frustrating. So what happens is, of course, everyone focuses on racism. Okay, now it's possible that cop was racist. Had racist possible. Sure, why not? You'll never find it. You'll never prove it. And what can you do about it if you do find it? Right? But the reason that he had his fucking knee on George Floyd's neck was that George Floyd was in fact committing a crime that the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota deemed necessary for an armed police officer to address. Forging a check, right? Just like the guy who was just shot at Wendy's in Atlanta, right? Which, he was flat drunk, everyone agrees. Yes, he grabbed a taser and tried to shoot it at the cop. By that point, oh, totally, the cop was obligated to shoot him. By that point. But the fucking cops, 2 armed cops, did not need to show up to deal with a dead drunk dude in a Wendy's drive-thru who was unarmed, totally non-threatening. He was just passed out in his car, but 2 armed cops. It's the number of encounters with police that determines the rate of police brutality in any society. If you just put armed agents of the state in contact with the citizenry, you're going to get bad moments like that. Shit happens, right? People get drunk, people get irrational. Some people have mental health problems, whatever, right? That's what we've done in this country. That's what I'm kind of getting to here. So, and this is Alexander's point about a radical new movement that's possible. So when Ferguson happened, it was actually a moment there when a lot of conservatives and right-wingers and Republicans and even police officers were like, yeah, we need to demilitarize the police. We need to stop sending people with big guns to deal with every single social problem, right? There was this moment at the very beginning of that when that was happening, and Camille Foster and I and others who were dealing with this were looking at this and we're like, oh my God, it's about to happen. And the Koch brothers were were funding initiatives, and Soros was funding initiatives to reform the police and all this stuff. And we were like, oh my God, it's going to be a pan-partisan, cross-racial movement that's going to radically change one of the most horrendous things the United States does now, right? We incarcerate so many fucking people. We ruin so many lives in Mexico and around the world because of this fucking thing, right? It's disgusting, right? We were and what did Black Lives Matter do? And forget Black Lives Matter because they're not the fault. What did NBC, right, and the New York fucking Times and the Washington Post and CNN do? They made it all about race and racism and race and racism, race and racism, and he's racism and this is racism, race, which is not only probably wrong, but it gets us absolutely nowhere. So again, 500,000 people who look like the three of us are in prisons right now in this country. That's more than any other country on earth. Just the white people. The rate would be like 4th highest in the country if it was just white people.
No.
We have mass incarceration just of white people, but no one cares at all. So it's about the state versus the people. It's not about white people versus black people. It's not about white cops versus black citizens. It's about the state killing and caging millions of us of all colors.
Yeah, it's about violence. It's about systemic violence. And of course, I mean, if you want to make a proper analysis of the whole George Floyd case, it's a class. It's an issue of class and not about race.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers are out there. In the black community points this out, that 60 people, I think, every day are killed by other blacks in Chicago. The vast majority of murders in America are blacks who kill blacks. And then blacks kill a few whites, and whites kill a few whites. And actually, the number of whites killing blacks, including white cops, in that case is less than 1% of all murders in America.
Tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny, because they simply don't live in the same neighborhood. So they have no reason to kill each other. Otherwise, Americans are happy to kill anybody they find who has a gun, and they have a gun and they kill. So it is systemic violence that is the problem here, not systemic racism. And of course, systemic class, we got the class issue because like Brazil, for example, Brazil's going to blow up over the next few months because the coronavirus is going to hit Brazil worse than anywhere else, probably. And Brazil is like the vulgarization of the United States. I love it for it. You'd love it, Thad, too, unless you've been there, because you find more shamanoid and renegade people in Brazil probably anywhere else on the planet. But it is also enormous class divisions. The wealthy are incredibly wealthy, and the whole tax system is geared towards pensions for the already wealthy, even worse than the United States. And I predicted when the coronavirus happened that these were specifically these countries, Russia, America, Brazil, were the ones that would get the worst hit, both socially, economically, and certainly pandemically. So that's where we're at.
I hope you're wrong about the pandemic, but I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm much more sanguine and optimistic about it. I think it's been mostly a hoax. But in this
pandemic,
in this country,
it's going to kill a few million people, and about 0.6% of people who get it die, especially if they're old or fat.
Yeah, but as you were saying, it really only affects that one slice of the population. And then, in other words, like I just think there's been a lot of hysteria about the pandemic.
Oh, too. Yeah. I mean, the hysteria is way worse than the pandemic. I declared it. I got the COVID-19. I had 3 weeks. They were terrible, but still,
really?
I did. But I mean, I did podcasts on Sweden. Said, listen, I'm coughing, I'm sick, but I don't care. The hysteria from early March onwards is worse than anything else, and the hysteria is going to cause the main damage. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Especially with female unemployment. You know, the disease itself hit mostly men. 70% of the people who get killed were men so far. But actually, the unemployment figures and all that coming in now show that it's actually female unemployment that is really disastrous out there.
Service work.
Exactly. Yeah. The way I describe it is, if a shop closes down because nobody can go shopping any longer, then 3 women are fired, and that means 3 guys in a logistics center get that job instead for an e-commerce company and become couriers. So actually, it's kind of a weird virus. Like, it's not feminist, because it's actually, but the consequence we see now, socially, economically, etc., from the corona pandemic worldwide, the corona hysteria definitely since March has been way worse than the pandemic itself. Yes, absolutely.
I hadn't thought about the gender split with the virus, but you're right, or the quarantine, I should say. Most, not all, but most of my business is e-commerce. So I've done fine through this. In fact, in some ways done better. Yeah. My girlfriend, on the other hand, worked at a retail store. Guess who's unemployed? Right. So, and I think that's got to be true. That's got to be true. A very common thing. So, so I think that there is a chance now to have, because we now have cops and Republicans and conservatives agreeing on George Floyd and saying and thinking and talking about police reform now. So I do think there's another chance here, despite how fucking crazy most of the protests have been. I think I'm actually coming, and I've been livid about most of it, and I've criticized it all day on Twitter every day for weeks now. But I'm actually coming to think that it's going to have a net positive result, which is that Minneapolis, they're starting over. I mean, they're maybe crazy, but I like the idea of a city government throwing away its police department and starting from scratch and seeing what they can do. It could come up with something worse, but that's great. I mean, that's an opportunity. That's a phenomenal opportunity. And then we have several other cities have already announced that they're going to start defunding, not totally, but reducing the funding of their police, which is great because those fuckers do not need body armor and tanks. Thank you very much. But
can I be the bad news in that case? I would certainly think that the mindset of people coming out of lockdown this summer, you're going to see more explosions out there than any summer you've seen for the past 40 years. And that's going to be both in Europe and North. We've got Dijon in France been blown up the last few days. It's Muslims against Muslims. So really bad, right? So
the thing in Dijon. Oh my God.
That's just the beginning. And people mimic, right? So say you're a young guy, you have no reason not to get this baton or this gun and go out there and fight right now and get this frustration out of your system. So the young men all over Europe are going to go out in the streets. We see it in Scandinavia. They're going to go out there and they find any cause to fight for. And it's no longer left or right. It's just like any cause out that you could fight for, they'll go out there in the streets. And the problem with that is, of course, that anytime chaos arrives on that level, people say we need more police budgets, we need more money to the police. Certainly here in Europe, maybe the police are more civilized here in America, but don't you see that could be the problem as well in America when you get to August, September? That all these police reform talk is over and suddenly it's all about, we got to bust the police, more budgets.
You mean we could have more policing because of this?
Yeah.
As a reaction. Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, the thing is, though, if you look at the history of the big riots in this country, so the 1960s, of course, we had several in major cities where the Army and the National Guard were called out. The 92 in LA, right? Those are the big ones. And then since Cincinnati is the unknown one, but that was huge in 2001. In every single case in all those cities, so this is Newark, Detroit, LA, Cincinnati, and New York, those police departments now, as a result of those riots, they still suck, but they are way better. I mean, the LAPD before 1992 was known by everybody to be straight up seriously racist and criminal. Like, there were actual drug runners, murderers, rapists, throughout the LAPD. They all got thrown out. The rules of conduct are still, they're sort of more militaristic, which it's an interesting thing, right? The military in some ways is preferable, right? Because they're better, they're better trained, they're more disciplined, they're more orderly. And so that's what you get now. You get like overwhelming force, which is a US military doctrine from Colin Powell and Caspar Weinberger, came straight down to the police departments. So if you commit any kind of crime, there's going to be 4 cops on you. Or 8 cops on you. I had 4 cops come to my apartment, my house, when I kicked a cardboard box in my backyard once because someone thought I was beating up my girlfriend. So 4 police show up to this professor's house in Los Angeles, right? Like, what am I going to do to anybody? But that's common. I mean, that's what they do. It's overwhelming force all the time. That actually comes from the military. There's a lot that can be reformed, and that has been reformed in response to riots. Riots work.
This is the question I wanted to ask anyhow. So, because I think there are books that question the functionality of riots and populist movements, and there are books that say some work and some don't, and there are some opinions that say, they always work, and you see it. But where do you stand on that issue? Do you think like populist movements make sense in a way?
Well, I'm just saying riots against police brutality.
Okay, but more in general, because we were also talking about like what's going on in the street right now.
It depends on what the riot is putatively about or ostensibly about. So if it is viewed as being about, and that's what it's about, right? So the perception of the riot, if it's viewed as being about police brutality, in every case that I've seen so far, you've had major reforms instituted. And by the way, that's the reason we have black cops, which is, not like not a panacea, but like it's something, right? But we have a, tremendous reduction in police brutality actually over the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, it is much, much better to be a black person in LA now than it was in the 1980s. Trust me, ask anybody. But I'm always talking about the civil rights movement, also about Me Too and those.
Okay. Can I come in there? Sure, the problem today is that it's a lot easier to get people out there to riot because of the internet. The problem, though, is that the internet is just lack of impulse control. So it means the staying power is ridiculous. I was offered to speak even at Occupy Wall Street and turned it down. So I'm a critic, turned it down instantly and said, no, you can't do that these days because Occupy Wall Street will be an Instagram picture, a t-shirt over within 3 days, and the financiers of Wall Street will laugh their heads off. Because the kids today, they sit there and do the hashtags on the computers, and it's easy, right? It seems like a shortcut to doing something, when in reality you're not really out there, you're not threatening anybody. And unless you're threatening somebody, right, it's not going to work. So once they get them to the physical, yeah, this is like real, this is like in real world. Oh, it's real violence. Yeah, sure. You run around, you're excited for like 3 days. But if you don't have a goal set and a vision and a strategy of what you want to accomplish and some leadership, like a Lenin, like he was a genius at this. If you don't have a leader who sets out a goal, we're going to achieve this, and by day 3, this must have been achieved day 4 this year. No. These guys romanticize about the riots like if it was a Burning Man thing all the time. And they're all like, oh, we're flat, we're all decentralized, we all listen to each other. And they have endless meetings when everybody has to be listened to. Yeah. And never reaching a conclusion, which is like a sort of passive-aggressive feminine aspect of organization that doesn't work when you want a real radical change. So they don't threaten anybody. I didn't meet anybody in New York or Wall Street who was the slightest bit threatened by Occupy. They said, oh, there's a bunch of kids out there. Can we sell them T-shirts, right? Yeah. So, capitalism works, because why would they be offended? And Occupy failed. Attack failed before that. All these sort of media-hyped, riot-ish movements we've had the last 20 years have failed miserably. And I don't know about Me Too, maybe it did change for the better or something in the workplace. Here it did not, because in Scandinavia it misfired completely. It was mimicked from America. They had all these male celebrities accused. None of them was guilty. This was just shit talk. This was just like all the borderline nutcases you fucked in your life were suddenly credible, making accusations against celebrity men. I defended several of them and got a lot of hack for it. But I just went out and said, listen, as long as the older women are not part of the discourse, this is just a bunch of young Instagram narcissistic girls who never read a book in their lives, high on their own egos, who discovered the hashtag was a weapon and spread all these lies in closed Facebook forums. And now when I have my debates with the young girls, because I do like mentorships with young girls who are in tech, right? That's a good thing to do. And all these girls are saying they're 25 years old, they really look great, they're smashing, they're well-educated, they're ready to go into tech and make a career. And they said, well, we don't get the mentorships because all the guys get the mentorships. Yeah, because the mentorships are run by older men. And it's now illegal for a man that's over 50 to walk into a room with a 25-year-old girl, because that would be considered sexual harassment automatically because of Me Too. I said that 2 years ago. I said, you must understand there's a price you're paying, because you're actually killing chains of trust in a society. And then the older men are just going to turn away and say, no way I ever get close to a young woman because I'll be suspected of sexual harassment.
Sure.
And now the girls are discovering this. And finally, the young girls are having this discussion. It's like, can we convince older women to be our mentors? Because otherwise we'll never have careers. So it takes a few years for the whole dialectic to play through. But when we sit at least here in Europe and mimic these things in America for all the wrong reasons and run into these megalomanic hashtag things and this romantic idea that decentralized mobs can somehow change the world, I think that's a terrible mistake. It takes much more of strategy and knowledge to actually win cases, right?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And all of which I say, thank God that they don't have a Lenin, that they don't have a political party, that they're not organized. I've been saying this to people for weeks now. Like, I'm not that worried about it because I see no political party coming out of this. I see no political organization. Even Black Lives Matter doesn't have a real organization, right? By this time, with all the money and all the celebrity that they have, they don't have an organization that you could even identify. I mean, and much less a political party. I've said to people for weeks now, like, as long as there's no political party being formed, it's fine. When you start seeing political parties with some backing, then you can get nervous about, bad kinds of radicals taking power. But these people are not going to take power. It's like spasms of anarchic violence that are juvenile. By the way, it's almost entirely people who were like 20 or under, right?
It's almost that they need to take a selfie while they use the gun at the same time or something, right?
Yeah, we've actually seen that. There was like a famous picture of like some girl, like in LA or somebody, having her boyfriend take a picture of her in front of a smashed out store.
I saw that.
Yeah. And I said, that sums it all up right there. So it's a disorganized movement. And thank God, imagine if it were organized, how much damage it would do to everything, right? Now, that's the good news.
It would be a Maoist cultural revolution if it was organized. Yes.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The culture of it is straight Maoist, I think. The impulses are straight Maoist, like the way they talk, and the sort of the mechanism of social change is straight up Maoist, right? Shaming and all that stuff. But there's no Mao. Thank God, right? So, but then again, the state does not like disorder at all. And so the state has to respond. And the state so far seems to be responding in a fairly good way, which is to like take some of the guns away from the cops, you know? So I think that's what's going to come out of this. And it'll be largely forgotten by the fall. I think my prediction has been that both the pandemic and these riots will be largely forgotten by the fall. We'll be talking about stupid electoral politics again, and it'll be all gone.
Can I ask two questions to you directly related to this? Is it overblown to say that Charlottesville was prophetic in the sense that the alt-right and the alt-left that were created out of the Charlottesville could gain traction, especially when they love each other and sort of push each other forward? I'm thinking, would you see a sort of Portland, Oregon armed Charlottesville or something like that in the foreseeable future?
Oh, like an alt-left?
Alt-left versus alt-right. I mean, they love each other because they gain momentum as soon as one of them is in the arena. And I mean, if one of the Black Lives Matter protests right now will lead to mass shooting, it will be a completely different thing all of a sudden, right? And that's not at all unlikely.
I'm terrified of a mass shooting, and I'm
okay. Then we got to put that in one of the boxes here. Say today that Charlottesville should be studied carefully. Because these two groups, I know the alt-right and the alt-left, I know them really well. We have dialogues with them in Europe. They love each other to bits because as soon as one of them gets attention, the other one grows exponentially.
They're symbiotic.
And they're getting armed. They're symbiotic and they're getting armed. And they also know that if the alt-right and the alt-left get the arena, everybody else is forced to take sides and there's no middle ground left.
If they arm up, I mean, this is the way the American state has operated forever. Okay, so this is a classic American story. If they do actually arm themselves into essentially what would be militias, I guess.
Yes.
I absolutely guarantee you they will all get killed by the state. By the state. By the U.S. The United States does not fuck around with people with armed dissidents of any kind. They will kill you if you're the Klan. That's what they did to the Klan in the 1970s. They infiltrated them. Mm-hmm. People don't know this. The famous COINTELPRO program, right? That was an infiltration of two organizations primarily: the Black Panthers, which everybody knows about, and the Ku Klux Klan, which they put just as much into. They destroyed both those organizations from inside because the state does not want anybody on the fringes running anything or with guns, right?
Oh yeah.
So if the alt-right and the alt-left get serious, get Lenins, get guns, and start shooting, I guarantee you they will get annihilated. The United States doesn't fuck around. You don't just get punished, you get annihilated. Ask the Nazi regime, ask the Japanese Empire, ask, the poor.
John Brown, for example.
What's that?
John Brown, for example.
The abolitionist?
Yeah.
But
I mean, he wanted to rob the armory to weaponize the blacks. And so came, what was his name, Custer, and killed him and his 7 sons, and it was a complete destruction.
Yeah, they hanged everybody. Yeah, shot and hanged everybody. The South, they annihilated the Confederacy. They just killed them all. The Nazis, they just killed all of them. They killed them all, right? They tried to do the same thing in Korea and Vietnam. They just weren't successful. But they just tried to kill all the communists, all of them, which would have been totally fine for the American state and the American people if they just killed all the communists.
And where does this tradition come from? That you just kill them. You don't win them over. You just kill them. Where does it come from?
Well, it's a split. There's always been a split. And thankfully, well, I don't know. It's the devil you know and the devil you don't know or whatever. But so there's always been a split between, and this goes back to the Indian Wars. There's been this sort of the John McCains of an American history who just want to kill everybody. They did something bad to our boys, kill them all, fuck them. And there's no ideology beyond that. And then there's the assimilationist, progressive, imperialist ideology that says, wait. kill the ones you've got to kill to get the job done. But the point here is to bring everybody into America, to assimilate all of the world into, and make everybody into, like, I guess Sweden is now, right? So yeah, we've got to kill Ho Chi Minh and the communists, but the whole point of the Vietnam War was to remake Vietnam into America. It wasn't to annihilate it. It was to annihilate the bad guys who were stopping that from happening, but to make America into a good New Deal progressive, make Vietnam into a good progressive America. So that's been an argument going on since the 19th century. What to do with the Indians? Do we kill them or put them in boarding schools? Right? The Philippines, do we wipe those little brown savages out, which many people wanted to do? Or do we put our own schools in the Philippines, which is exactly what happened? And we trained generations of Filipinos to be just like Americans, right? Same thing. And then with Germany, it was like, man, they got close to killing just everybody, but they realized they needed some population to run the industrial center that was going to get rebuilt in the center of Europe. So they left some Germans behind. But, so that it's always a split. And same with Japan, right? Obviously, much of America wanted to kill every fucking Jap they could find. But Douglas MacArthur was like, and Harry Truman were like, wait. No. What we want is cooperative people on that end of the ocean. We want people who do what we say on that side of the Pacific. And that's what they got. So they managed to assimilate. They wrote the Constitution for the new Japan. And all their leaders ever since have had to toe the party line of America, right? And so it's much better to do that, the American ruling class found out, than to just kill everybody.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but where does it come from? I mean, you were talking about this in the beginning. You were talking about hysteria and how it grew out of the Salem witch trials. Like, how is, I mean, for the lack of a better word, the soul of the meta narrative of a nation be formed in that kind of way? What makes America different in that respect?
Christians, Puritans founded us. So the formal culture was founded by Puritans, actual Puritans, right? And then, why I don't have an explanation for why it persisted over the centuries, except I think isolation, physical isolation is part of it. Wealth is another part of it. Only a wealthy people spend their time inside their heads the way that we do. Right. And all of this politics stuff is just in our heads, right? We invent all these fantasies about politics. Only wealthy people do that. But there's been a Protestant evangelical and puritanical streak running through American formal culture since the 16th century.
And hysteria was always part of that mindset.
The hysteria, I mean, there have been hysterias of all kinds. I don't know if it's connected to it probably is connected to the Christian ethos.
It is also connected to the more nomadic culture that America is, because Americans move on average 3 times more often than European people do during a lifetime. Okay. And they also move over larger distances. So you can move from, say, South Carolina to California. That's quite normal in America. Yeah. Whereas if you move from, say, France to Bulgaria, that's a much bigger operation, say, in Europe. So in a culture where you move a lot, it's easier to create social tension because you actually don't know your neighbor that well. Say a rumor being spread in the community where people don't know each other will stick a lot easier. And then the release is to find somebody scapegoat or something to get that out of the system. So the kind of hysteria you find in America, but you don't find in India, is because Indians are stuck and been stuck in the same place for 5,000 years. In southern India, mitochondria are the same as they were 5,000 years ago. Whereas in America, people have moved and moved and moved. And they still do exoduses. America still do. They tried to do to the moon, didn't work, but they did to Hawaii. So 1959 at least, they were limited now to do their exoduses within that realm, but the Americans move all the time. And the fact that they move so easily means it's also easier for them to jump into these sort of lynch mobs, I think.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this is speculative on my part. I can't prove this, but my guess is that it's about social isolation. So it's kind of what you're saying, Alexander, in a sense. I think Americans are not just isolated physically from the rest of the world, which I do think is important, but we have been historically, we have celebrated the rugged individualist, the self-regulating individual, the classical liberal John Locke person, right?
The two most American English words are community and congregation.
Well,
I mean, they're hard to translate even the way they're used. In American English, you talk about the community. Maybe I don't know if it's false.
But that's because we spend so much time atomized in our culture.
Yeah. So there's family, community, congregations. That's your responsibility. You're incredibly atomized. Exactly.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And so
I
think
community and congregation instead of state. It's like, okay, maybe we can fix this without even calling the cops and sort it out. That's community. Yeah. And also, you go to church on Sundays not because you're religious, but because the American identity is so young and so multifaceted that the only way to get a proper identity in America is to add a prefix to American. And that's exactly what the church gives you. It says that you're Lutheran American or you're Catholic American or Muslim American or whatever. Yeah. Which works, actually. It's imperial.
Right. So, we have more church going and more community. Tocqueville wrote about this. Americans are more into voluntary associations than any other culture, and that's because they're so lonely.
Yeah. That's why I love Burning Man.
Yeah.
You know? I think America at its best is, after all, 80,000 people going into the desert, and nobody makes a penny out of going there, and they still do the most amazing things and take tons of drugs. You know.
The social isolation, I think, is at the root of the hysteria. Because, just speaking for myself, right? I mean, the quarantine has really driven this home for me, and I'm sure a lot of people. I mean, I knew before the quarantine, the more time I spend by myself, the more that my fears, and often my irrational fears, grow, right? In my head. And in the quarantine, especially lately, I've been spending more and more time alone, like everyone has. And I've noticed that my irrational fears and rational fears grow and grow and grow and grow. And the more social I get, like as soon as I started sitting down and talking to you guys, like the fears that I was obsessing about this morning when I was alone dissipate. And America we've organized our society, and the nuclear family being so central to our society too. That's also isolating and atomizing, right? These are little islands of people, right? Tiny little islands. I think that probably, I'm guessing here, I think that has a lot to do with our history of hysteria.
And renegades do immunize you, though, to a certain extent, because the renegades don't go for nuclear families, do they?
No.
They don't go for the model you're given. They have to invent their own model. They're like a crazy wisdom thing thrown into American society. That's exactly why the whole creative flow in American cultures come from the shamanic caste or your renegades.
Yeah.
That's exactly why.
Right. They tend to be, but they're also individualists, whether they're atomized.
Oh, shamans are naturally. I mean, the problem with atomization is that's incredibly inhumane for 92% of people. But for shamanoids and for androgynous people, the other two categories I got 4% each, the shamanoids and androgynous people in our studies are atomized and can handle it. That's the whole point, because they're go-betweens. Androgynous are go-betweens, men and women, and the shamanoid people are go-betweens between tribes.
Okay.
Because the go-betweens, they're on the move all the time. And when you're on the move all the time, you got to take care of yourself because you're on the move all the time.
Yeah, right. Huh.
That's why individuality or individualism, the Cartesian version of it was basically autism. That was an autistic fantasy of the world that later became individualism, because when you took people out of slavery and put them into factories, you didn't want to pay them 24 hours a day. You only pay them 8 hours a day. And that's exactly when you wanted to individualize the worker, and you preached a certain religion called individualism, which is the state religion of America. And that religion was an atomization of human beings. But what you did was that you copied something that works for shamanoid and androgynous people, but it doesn't work at all for the rest of the population, who still struggle with that all the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, some of us thrive on it, right? Intellectuals, obviously.
Yeah, the nuclear family only works in America when grandparents are around and when the uncles and the aunts are around. Then it works, and that's exactly how it works so well for immigrant communities who are highly successful. So you go into Korean, Cambodian, Nigerian communities in America. It takes them a generation to bypass the Afro-Americans in income that easily. Why? Because the Afro-Americans is a hardworking woman with kids and no father there because he's locked up in prison. Whereas the immigrant communities take the grandparents and uncles with them for babysitting so they can double career and send their kids to Harvard.
That's right. Yeah, the regular nuclear family is hard enough, which we could call like the white nuclear family. The black nuclear family it has only one goddamn parent in it.
Yeah,
right? It's at least twice as hard. That's right.
Oh God, it's hard. And we admire those women for the struggle they do, but God, they have a heart.
I mean,
despite their bachelor's degrees, they get stuck because the men aren't there. They're locked up. So bringing me to the question I got, where we could connect possibly if we finally could win the war on drugs, and also fight for the free and open algorithm and get technology right in America and the rest of the world. could these two things be combined? And in that cases, you don't believe the riots work. How would you then, without getting a Lenin in there to say that, how would you think of winning that actually political legal struggle to get those things right in America? The ultimate challenge, I know, for the next 100 years, but yeah.
So the open source, open algorithm, right?
Yeah, love those things.
Blockchain, cryptocurrency.
Anything that keeps political manipulation and commercial corruption out of the algorithm. So it is you and me being similar, get to know the same music, the same word, and also be challenged by the same thing, so we can expand, right? The dream of the real algorithm, right?
Yeah, and it also dissolves the nation state faster than anything else. So it
wins everything. It wins everything. It kills academia and all those things. It's the phallus. It is the phallus of the 21st century. The phallic algorithm is what I call it. It has to be free and open. Don't compromise on it. Don't corrupt it. Don't manipulate it.
Yeah, you can even.
I think Silicon Valley can't stop themselves from manipulating at the moment, which means somebody else is going to build the free and open algorithm. Probably somebody in Canada is already building AI. That's probably the most exciting place in the world right now.
Yeah. So I think and I hope that's the future. I'm pretty sure. I'm assuming that's where we're going, and I'm trying to like align myself and my business with that as soon as I can.
Yeah.
So
we should go to a hackers conference together, all three of us.
Which conference?
The hackers conference.
Oh, okay.
The hackers.
Sure.
The hackers these days are the new rebels. They're not out there doing the riots in the streets. They're actually doing what needs to be done, which is they're constantly obsessed with creating free and open and shared spaces online.
So
and platforms for people to build.
So you know what we're doing at Renegade University?
Oh yes.
We're hiring hackers as our faculty to teach people how to hack.
You already are the king of the hackers, aren't you?
Fuck yeah. Yeah. So we have 2 courses in development right now who are being taught by a hacker who's a brilliant computer scientist.
Do you realize how priestly this is?
Yeah.
You realize you're becoming a priest. It's a very priestly activity.
I know.
Because you're actually defending freedom in an age of chaos and hoping to present an alternative freedom of order.
Yeah, but don't tell anybody that.
Okay. No, but we need to tell them because we're on the case to stop Xi Jinping from creating a monarch censocracy where we're going to create a plural censocracy. So we got to create a world of censors and censors everywhere. And AI, AI being logic, human beings being pathos. Yeah, but it has to be plural. That's the whole trick. Decentralized.
I love what you're saying, but just when you call me priestly, just keep it private, just between us, okay? Don't say it in a public forum, okay, Alexander?
Okay, I will.
Because it's very embarrassing for me.
Why? Why? I come from such an atheistic, nihilistic culture that anything these days that smacks of religion is sexy. It's just like we want to. These Tom and I come from cultures where it's so boring with this secularization, which, by the way, is ironic. Of course, people aren't secularized. They don't just to realize where their fucked up hidden religion has gone, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I have a perverse attraction to Catholicism.
Interesting. So Are we going to save the Catholic Church?
I mean, I kind of hope so.
What we need to do is we have to handle the biggest fucking scandal in human history.
Right.
Which is the pedophilia has been rampant in the Catholic Church for 2,000 years, not just the last 30. And the way I perceive it is that it wasn't as bad as perceived. It's just that these priests were a bit rushing to the case because they should have waited until the guys got a little older and then do what they did. It's just like
yeah.
Right. On drugs.
What's
with grown-up men and on drugs? That's when you should do what they did to the little boys, and then that would have been okay, wouldn't it?
You know what I've noticed in my social network recently that's like completely caught me by surprise. I think I know about a half a dozen people. Yeah. At least a half a dozen people who converted to Catholicism from being secular, political, cynical types.
Yeah.
In their adulthood, like in their 30s and 40s, and became serious. And I've been really fascinated by that. So I might be have something to do with
I'm writing a new book with Jan Söderqvist at the moment. We're 3 years into it. It's the follow-up to Digital Libido. And it's going to be massive work, probably called Process and Event. And it's actually going to rewrite the history of religion radically. So I'm a Zoroastrian myself. Okay. The only really phallic religion ever. It's just like you got to conquer the world. That's Zoroastrianism, right? So, and they did it. They had the Persian Empire 1400 years. And the way they did it was that they separated the chieftain and the priest, radically separated, must never be united. The Egyptians tried to unite them and invented dictatorship by Akhenaten. So we've struggled with that ever since. Xi Jinping is now the Akhenaten of the world. He's Egyptian. We got to be the Persians this time around. Separate the phallus, keep the king and the priest separate. Different courts, don't mix the two. And then the matriarch can hold us all responsible for what we do. And that's the beauty of the American Constitution.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's basically set up to be, there's the king called the president. There's the priest called the Congress. They dictate law. One of them is the will to transcendence, which is supposed to be the president. One is the will to intelligence, which is, of course, the Congress. And then you got the fucking matriarch holding responsible for delivering. Otherwise, you won't get to fuck her virgins. And that's, of course, the Supreme Court. It's a Persian Jewish construct. And that's the beauty of it. That's what the French knew when they took it to America. And that, to me, is the grounding on which you build this forceful state that actually kills the alt-right and alt-left when needed. Yeah. It isn't that bad, right?
Damn. Lots to take in there, man. I was only halfway through my answer, though.
Go back. We want your full answer.
Right? Well,
love this conversation.
So the one was about crypto, blockchain, open source. And I think and I hope that that's the future. And there's nothing we can do about it. It's just going to happen. Okay? And that's great. Yay. Okay? And there's no organizing. There's no political parties. There's no Lenin needed. That's the whole point of it, right? It's spontaneous order and disorder. Thank God. Let's go for it. And it's
platforms like the printing press. You didn't need Lenin to create the printing press. You just needed tons of cheap printing presses in every street of Paris, and you got a revolution. Yeah.
And people went to town with it on their own. On their own. Yeah. They didn't need even to be told.
No.
Okay, so there's that. The other question was about criminal justice in this country and how that's going to change, right? And as I said, I think there's a moment here that's a possibility. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do all the time on Twitter and just talking to people is bringing together the people who are fucked by the state, which is everybody, but especially working class people, of course. But that's the point, of all colors. So yeah, and I actually think that's going to happen. I think there will be some reform. I still think there's going to be a lot of police killings. Here's the thing. It's a stupid country. It doesn't make any sense. This country doesn't make any sense. 350 million people in one government. What? That's terrifying. With the largest, most powerful military in the history of the world, a military that can kill everybody 10 times over in 5 minutes. And we have absolutely moronic, ignorant people who have never even heard of Syria voting for the person who has the power to kill everybody in 5 minutes. Okay. So that's unsustainable. I mean, that's unsustainable. That I don't know how long it's going to take for us to fuck up the world in a very serious way.
Well, you lost in Vietnam, you lost in Iraq, and you lost in Afghanistan. So at least you've lost 3 wars by now.
Thank God.
Maybe you don't care, but at least you did lose those 3 wars.
Thank God. Yeah. I mean, it just means that we've put more into technology to do remote controlled killing. So we are much better at drones and using the Air Force and using special operations to kill people. But yeah, we don't have the big boots on the ground land invasions. I mean, not since Iraq. And probably not, well, who knows though? Who knows? I mean, if Russia or China does something when Trump or Biden or Hillary or whoever is president, I could see Americans getting behind another land invasion war. We've done it many, many times when Americans were not in the mood for a war. And next thing you know, 500,000 of us are in some fucking country you've never heard of. So don't ever count that out. I think we could have a draft at any moment. A precipitating event, right? These happen all the time. And then all of a sudden, boom, everybody's behind it. Pearl Harbor, they're lies, the lies of the nations, of the heads of state, the Gulf of Tonkin, Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Pearl Harbor wasn't a lie, but it was created by a series of lies.
Yeah.
The Lusitania.
I think that's a fascinating conundrum, that the guy who was behind the Gulf of Tonkin incident was actually the father of Jim Morrison, who was,
I didn't know that.
of course, he was the admiral who was in command of the fleet, and that was the reason why Jim hated his father so much.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's a great factoid. I did not know. Wow, cool. It's a bad country that needs to be dissolved. I mean, it's just the structure of it. It doesn't make any sense.
Do you think the thing with San Francisco and Silicon Valley, tech companies have gone up, and NASDAQ is up because of Corona, right? But all my friends in Silicon Valley have discovered working from home. They never want to go back to the Mountain View offices ever again. And it's the most expensive address in the world, and the homeless people everywhere. And California is basically going into the mega drought, and it's terrible, right? And everybody's talking about Canada. And they seriously move to British Columbia, Vancouver, where all the Chinese are going to come from Hong Kong anyway. The number one option for the Hong Kong Chinese is going to be Vancouver. Number two was Sydney, and three, America, right? So Canada, it's like the age of the surf dude with a laptop and it's like it's cooler air around your head and much more complex intelligence systems required to create the enormous value that come out of that called AI. But that's all happening now in Canada. When I'm going to work with AI people, they'll tell me to go to Montreal, not Silicon Valley. No,
I didn't know that. And
dig into that.
And
because maybe Canada is the civilized place where people escape to, and actually where the riches are created, and then America becomes the mess or the colony or whatever that where the manufacturing goes on or something like that. I don't know.
And Pornhub is in Montreal, so I mean.
Everything we love is in Canada. Cannabis is smoking legal. I mean, the drugs, everything. Civilization is in Canada.
Oh.
It's just a bit cooler. It's a bit like Scandinavia where I live. It's not too cold. No. The way to do it is you live in Canada, and then you go to Mexico in the winter for a couple months, and then go back to Canada, and you skip what's in between. I do that in Europe, Tom. I live in Scandinavia, which is wonderful now in the summer. It's so beautiful, clean water, and 7 nude beaches in Stockholm. It's full of all the trannies and the drug takers you love. Everything is here, right? And then in the winters, I go to the tropics, or at least to the Mediterranean, where Tom lives in Majorca. So, and skip whatever is in between. That's the boring part.
That's a great idea, skipping over the states, Canada to Mexico. Because I love Mexico. I love Mexico.
I love Mexico. I love Mexico.
Let's do something in Mexico, man. Mexico.
Yes. Oh, I've got secret shit that we can't record with Tom. Going on in Mexico.
I'm sure you do. Mexico is amazing.
I've got Peruvian engineers who've extracted 150 different psychedelic substances that they now create thousands of different compounds with, and they need students to try these things on.
I'm going to skip that trip. That sounds a little scary.
Publicly, you will skip that trip.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was code for sign me up.
Yeah. Shit's going on. Yeah.
I love it. This is fun.